Day 869 of the Trump administration. The president returns to the White House and his political battles after a 5-day trip to the UK, Ireland, and France. While on board Air Force One on the way home, couldn't help himself. Trump sounded like a man who couldn't wait to get back to work. He wrote, quote, "Heading back to D.C., many great things are happening for our country." Tonight, Trump announced that a deal has been reached with Mexico on illegal immigration and, quote, "The tariffs scheduled to be implemented by the U.S. on Monday against Mexico are hereby indefinitely suspended." More on that just ahead. Politico points out what it calls the harsh reality of what's ahead for Trump, who is, quote, returning to a feud with House Speaker Pelosi, also noting intensifying oversight probes. That can hurt. While Trump was primarily overseas to participate in events to commemorate the 75th anniversary of D-Day, he was also on a state visit to the UK, let's not forget, which was long on pageantry and opportunities to sound and act presidential.
This week, we commemorate a mighty endeavor of righteous nations and one of the greatest undertakings in all of history. I offer a toast to the eternal friendship of our people.
Last night was really quite unbelievable with the Queen, because that is a great woman.
The enemy is strong, and we know that by thy grace and by the righteous of our cause, our sons will triumph.
This beach, codenamed Omaha, was defended by the Nazis with monstrous firepower. It was here that tens of thousands of the Americans came.
About the London visit, despite the president's claims to the contrary, he was not widely welcomed in that city, just judging by the protesters, which he interpreted differently.
I said, where are the protests? I don't see any protests.
You were not able to serve in Vietnam because of a bone spur conditioning.
Well, I was never a fan of that war. I thought it was very far away.
Or you said he didn't care. Mueller testified.
Let me tell you, he made such a fool out of himself. Nancy Pelosi's a disaster, okay? She's a nasty, vindictive, horrible person.
So that attack on Pelosi came in the wake of reports that in a private meeting, she told her caucus she wanted to see Trump imprisoned rather than impeached. Trump continued his attacks today, sending this from Air Force One, and we quote, "Nervous Nancy Pelosi is a disgrace to herself and her family for having made such a disgusting statement, especially since I was with foreign leaders overseas. There is no evidence for such a thing to have been said. Nervous Nancy and Dems are getting zero work done in Congress and have no intention of doing anything other than going on a fishing expedition to see if they can find anything on me, both illegal and unprecedented in U.S. history. There was no collusion. Investigate the investigators." Next week, House Democrats will ramp up their various investigations. They've announced a series of hearings related to the Mueller investigation, with the first one beginning on Monday. House Judiciary Committee, Attorney General Bill Barr, former White House counsel Don McGahn, and Secretary of Commerce Wilbur Ross, for good measure, are all facing potential contempt votes or possible legal action from the House. Meanwhile, the president will also be confronted with a legislature that has by no means tabled the discussion of impeachment. Here's the wall of faces and names. Today, the lone Republican congressman in this sea of faces who is in favor of impeachment was laying out his case for a move against the president based on the findings from the Mueller report. Judiciary Committee member David Cicilline, Democrat of Rhode Island, was much more direct in his assessment.
No one in this country, including the President of the United States, is above the law. We're going to get to the truth. We're going to follow the facts where they take us. We have to stop hoping the president is suddenly going to behave as if he will honor the rule of law.
There are also new reports unfolding in the cases spun off by the original Mueller investigation. Tonight, Politico is reporting a former aide to one-time Trump advisor, the unforgettable Roger Stone, has given a grand jury all of his text messages between him and Stone from October 2016 to March of 2017, plus the written agenda for Stone when he was at the Republican National Convention back in 2016. On that note, here for our leadoff discussion on a Friday night, Jill Colvin, White House reporter for the Associated Press, Nancy Cook, White House reporter for Politico, and Elliot Williams, former federal prosecutor who was also Deputy Assistant Attorney General and counsel to the Senate Judiciary Committee once upon a time. Good evening and welcome to you all. Jill Colvin, this tariff debacle, which was averted to coin a phrase, at the 11th hour. In your view, was it ever real? In your view, how real is this deal they worked out? Have you seen anything on paper with something like State Department letterhead yet?
Well, it was certainly real in the eyes of many White House staffers who believed up until some point yesterday that the president was really going to go through with this and were making preparations for the president to impose these tariffs. It seemed like he was really into the idea. But then again, it's very difficult for anybody to speak on the president's behalf while he's out of the country. And you've got staff level negotiators who are at the table. We did see very late tonight, the State Department did put out a document that describes the deal that Mexico agreed to. According to them, it does include some changes. For instance, we already knew that Mexico had agreed to deploy their National Guard throughout the country into their southern border with Guatemala. That was something that Mike Pence and the president had really been pushing for. They've also agreed to sort of accept this thing that the White House has already been doing, that the U.S. government has already been doing, where when people come and they request asylum, they're asked to wait for their cases to be processed on the Mexico side of the border. Mexico has now agreed to sort of embrace this policy and to expand this policy. But that's something that they've already been doing. And one of the big White House asks here, asking Mexico to basically overhaul its entire asylum system, we're not seeing in this agreement.
Hey, Nancy, our mutual friend A.B. Stoddard writes the following. Majority Leader Mitch McConnell knows any relief from a deal will only be temporary. McConnell has a uniquely honed long view. What he can see down the road ahead to Election Day is the president's fondness for tariffs and other drastic threats, and the majority he leads in peril. Well, 2 points here. Number one, it's good for the president to have a human backstop in the Senate. Number two, the majority leader has another day job, which is providing for all of us beyond the strategy and the game of it all.
Yeah, I think that what we saw this week while the president was abroad and having all these ceremonial events, some of them somber, some of them just sort of fun and full of pomp and circumstance, was that people who were here at the White House this week, and I talked to a bunch of them, were inundated with calls from Republicans on the Hill, particularly Republican senators, who did not want these tariffs. And I think that part of the reason that this agreement was reached was because we saw a potential fracturing between Republican lawmakers on the Hill who have mostly gone along with the Trump agenda, but who are really starting to balk at the idea of tariffs. And I think that there was a real hope on the part of the White House officials that were here this week that Trump would back down a bit. And I know that Acting Chief of Staff Mick Mulvaney on Air Force One, as they were returning from the UK tonight, or Ireland, excuse me, was trying to, talk to the president about a deal. And this is in part a response to Republican lawmakers like Majority Leader Mitch McConnell.
Hey, Elliot, if the Democrats in the House find their legal voice, so far it seems they've been limited to writing these letters that say some version of why I oughta. If they find their legal voice, how much of a real legal threat could they pose to this administration? How soon?
Well, the how soon is the big point, because the real legal threat will come from these contempt citations that are coming up. So, as you teased at the beginning of the segment, Brian, Wilbur Ross and William Barr, the two cabinet officials, are going to face contempt votes in Congress this week, which ultimately means Congress is approving a lawsuit again. That's what it means in plain language, right? Congress is voting to approve the right to sue them, to get them to come appear. Now, right now, that's what's going to make this work, like kicking this matter into the courts. It's clear that the president and the administration aren't going to send their witnesses to testify before Congress or face legal peril just by virtue of Congress being a co-equal branch of government. So you got to go to the courts. But the problem is courts take a notoriously slow time. And so when we live in a world, and the president clearly lives in a world of Twitter and immediacy, courts will take weeks and if not months to resolve things. But the trouble to the president is if his folks start getting ordered by courts to show up and testify and give documents to Congress. Now, the other thing is that as all of this litigation and these other cases are percolating, the president, as we know, has never met a bright, shiny thing he didn't like and just gets distracted distracted easily in the tweets and so on. And so even if there isn't immediate legal peril to the president, the mere fact that cases and matters are still percolating will distract the president and keep the tweets and keep the private conversations that trickle out going. And I think, that gets in the way of the president's underlying agenda. Because let's be clear, as long as the president is having private conversations in the White House about how furious he is about Nancy Pelosi and tweeting about how Mueller is, as long as he's doing those things, he's not focused on putting kids in cages. And to some extent, there's a value in that.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.